Hello everyone and welcome to the Backtracking episode proper for No Doubt, and we'll start with the band's debut album, No Doubt. Released in 1992, it will come out through Interscope Records to be produced by the band themselves alongside Dito Godwin. Now, I already went over what happened before this album's release, so I think we should start with the album's first song, BND, which is a 45-second instrumental track that will focus on the next song instead, titled Let's Get Back. For those more familiar with the band's style today, you people, like me, may have missed their debut here, which is a shame as... man, you know what, their current sound just doesn't do this album any justice at all. It's a really enjoyable boppy slice of ska punk, and it came out at a time where the grunge angst was growing in popularity. I mean, it was the early 90s after all. That may have gone against this album's favour though, as it didn't really sell as well as Interscope were expecting, and the only single release from the album was Trapped in a Box. As in, the song was named Trapped in a Box, not the song was trapped in a box somewhere and someone had to find it. Yeah. These issues would lead to the band signing out of their contract, but I'll talk more about that for their next album. Still, despite all that happened, this album is retrospectively remembered as maybe being their best stuff. If I'm being honest, it's my first full album by them, but knowing their style now, you wouldn't think that it's the same band, to be honest. The album is just really colourful, it's bouncy and has fun instrumentations. To my knowledge, this album never had a re-release, so that means that this album is almost 30 years old and it still sounds gorgeously produced even today. The lyrics about breakups and media control are very 90s and not new even for their time, but the way that they're told is done in such a snarky, entertaining way that I can't really hate it, and Gwen Stefani really sells that. My favourite song goes to Sinking. No Doubt's debut is a neatly put together and colourfully produced album with the band putting all their energy into it and then some, and trust me, the modern day stuff that they do now does not do this stuff any justice. Next is the band's second album, the Beacon Street Collection. Released in 1995, it would come out through Beacon Street Records and the band would produce it themselves. So yeah, their debut was a commercial flop despite, actually sounding really good, and Interscope and No Doubt parted ways. So the band decided they were a strong independent black woman who don't need no mainstream label man, so they spent the 3 years in between touring like hell and putting the work in for their sequel album here. This album, speaking of which, begins with a track titled Open the Gate, and yeah, it's just a great follow-up to their debut, to be honest. It's again just really bouncy and fun and vibrant, but also a more measured album in terms of its pacing as well. And I can't help but feel like if No Doubt were still unsigned and putting out great stuff like this, not only would they still be around, but they'd keep expanding on the style in a great way. But because Gwen's brother Eric didn't like giving up creative control, that would start to create a rift between the band members, which was not a good sign as he was their main songwriter as well as their primary producer. But while he's still with them in this time period, so to speak, I'm going to enjoy it. Again, the album is just presented with a catchy and fun structure, and the band just sound, for lack of a better term, free. That is present in the production as well, and again, 2.5 decades later, this album was only re-released once in 1997 and it still sounds bloody lovely today, so what the fuck were the band doing back then to make the production sound good today? I must know. And the lyrics cover things like abuse, the split with Interscope, and the theme of moving on, all feeling quite metaphorical. My favourite song goes to Snakes. Beacon Street is a great showcase of how the band should sound, expanding on their debut beautifully with great performances and production value that still hold up today. Next is the band's third album, Tragic Kingdom. Released in 1995, it would come out through Interscope Records and it would be produced by Matthew Wilder. So, yeah, after how well Beacon Street did for the band, Interscope suddenly decided that they were going to sign the band back to their label, and it would lead to Tragic Kingdom being the band's big mainstream breakthrough. It contains a lot of people's first No Doubt song, And Just a Girl, which was also my first song of theirs, I believe, and it would release some of the band's most popular singles, such as Spiderwebs, Don't Speak, and Excuse Me Mister. This album starts with Spiderwebs, and once again it's clear that the style isn't going anywhere. I bet the only difference is that this one is a bit better produced this time around, maybe? I don't know what it is, and I'm not normally someone who hates it when a band signs to a big label. But Interscope saw no value in No Doubt because their debut flopped, and after their second album was really good, they decided to sign them back up. And No Doubt were just all for it because they apparently lost their integrity in the space of about 7 fucking months. And the worst part is, I would feel a lot angrier about this album if it just weren't so damn good. I mean, yeah, as commercialised and cutthroat as it may feel, it's just so damn catchy. It's still got great structuring to its style, it's a fun album that has nice layers to it, and the production helps that all along quite nicely as well, adding some nice tones to the instrumental work especially. And the band obviously still sound great too, with Gwen Stefani being an energetic and spunky personality on the mic as always, and the rest of the band playing their instruments quite nicely as well. The lyrics cover things like frustration, forgotten love, differences, and breakups. My favourite song goes to Different People. I really do hate the circumstances behind this album. I can't find many issues with the end result, which is just bouncy, enjoyable, and memorable. All for good reason. There's a reason why this album stood the test of time. Next is the band's fourth album, Return of Saturn. Released in 2000, it would come out through Trauma and Interscope both, and it was produced by the band themselves alongside Matthew Wilder, Jerry Harrison, and Glenn Ballard. So I've lampshaded the band's behind-the-scenes troubles, and that is part of why this album took 5 years to come out. The band had a lot of touring to support Tragic Kingdom, and they'd written too many songs for that album that managed to stretch to this one. Not to mention so many people coming in and going out over a 2-year period where they were recording the album, the pressure to live up to Tragic Kingdom But hey, they still gave us something pretty good. The album starts with the single Ex-Girlfriend, and it's quite clear that this is a different No Doubt. It still carries a lot over from their previous albums with more reggae and hip-hop influences too, but the pacing is slowed down quite a lot. There are a lot of slow burn songs and a lot of ballads too, but unlike Tragic Kingdom, which filled its considerable length with some unique curveballs, that's not really what you get on Return of Saturn. And that sound did divide professional critics who know what they're doing, and it also divides fat almost 30-year-olds who only think they know what they're doing. That one's me. I'm the fat almost 30-year-old. I like a measured pace, don't get me wrong, but this is just dragged out in such an uninteresting way, with the more experimental style doing little to put me off of that fact. But the lyrics are interesting, at least focused on Gwen wanting her own life outside of the band and considering what would happen after the release of their next album. That is quite a good bit of foreshadowing. My favourite song goes to New. Return of Saturn shows the band trying something new that is very hit or miss, but they do try to dip their foot into new pools, and the oddly foreshadowing lyrics are actually quite nice as well, and it's still pretty good. It's just not as good as Tragic Kingdom was. Next is the band's fifth album, Rocksteady. Released in 2001, it would come out through Interscope Records again, and it would have a shitload of producers, including the band themselves, so I'm not going to bother naming them all. Now, after Return of Saturn, the band's mainstream success would lead to them lending songs to movie soundtracks and working with a lot of groups who would also collaborate with the band on this album, and co-write songs with them too. In fact, this thing was recorded by so many producers in so many different studios, I don't think I'd have the time to explain them all in just one video, so I ain't gonna. Anyway, this album begins with an intro track titled Intro, and the next song is a single titled Hella Good, which the band named without any sense of irony. But anyway, this album would be a sort of comeback for the band, mostly because they did the complete opposite of what they did in their debut. Whereas there, they put an album that was so against the anxiety conventions of what it was competing against. For this album, named Rocksteady, remember, they decided to do what everyone else was doing in 2001, hit the mainstream like a freight monster truck. This album still has some guitar in it, but it's pretty much just a pop album, mixing the most bare-bones elements of the band's usual ska and new wave style. And to be honest, it kinda works. The album's got a bouncy sort of structure to it, and yeah, it may focus a lot more on the poppier stuff than I would personally like, but at least it's not as dragged out this time around. The band do a good enough job to keep it simple, and I'm very happy about that. They didn't really complicate things, which is nice. The lyrics mostly talk about Gwen's relationship with both Amelia and Gavin Rossdale, who she would marry a year after this album's release. My favourite song goes to Detective. Rocksteady might reek of 2001 nostalgia, but it's a pretty good bounce back from their previous album, and it embraces its new style quite nicely too. And lastly, we reach the band's sixth and final album, Push and Shove. Released in 2012, it would come out through the same label as always and be produced by way too many people, including the band members again. So in the 11-year time gap between albums, the band did a fair bit of touring and released a greatest hits album before deciding to take a break in 2008. Some of the band members worked on other projects in between, and Gwen obviously still had a solo career going for her too, and eventually they reunited and decided to put another album out. Yay! And that album, this album rather, begins with one of the album's only two singles titled Settle Down, and yeah, the album sort of picks up where Rocksteady left off despite the decade-long layoff. It leans a bit more into its pop style, but there is still plenty of ska influence too, striking what's actually a pretty good balance in terms of its structure. And heck, I know that I haven't talked about it a lot in this video, but the production of this one is really good. I know that it's a more recent album, but you have to remember, it was a 2012 pop-leaning ska and new wave influenced sound by a band that's always meddled with their core formula, and they still find a way to make it work for the most part. It is paced well enough to match up to its sound too, and the lyrics talk about things like the band's image in the media and what they went through during their break. My favourite song goes to Gravity. While we may not get another No Doubt album anytime soon, Push and Shove has some really good moments to it and shows the band further embracing their exploratory nature once again in a nice and organic way. So that'll about do it for this one. What did you guys think though? Did Push come to shove for you, or was it more Tragic and Kingdom-like? Regardless of your answer, I'll see you next time for a two-part episode, the last two-part episode as I cover Limerick Island's own The Crown Breeze. And as always, thank you for watching, you're awesome. Bye bye.